Assalamu alaikum everyone. We'll get started with our program today. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Inshallah we'll have a very productive program. My name is Adil Rizvi. I'm the Secretary of the Board of Directors for Idara Jafriya. I want to thank everyone, especially our panel members, for joining us today. Took time out of a busy Saturday, I'm sure. And thank Rahat for setting up this initiative, which hopefully is one of many, not the only one, first of many. We've done it in the past, but hopefully this will be a springboard for subsequent events to keep our community engaged. Without further ado, just one or two housekeeping items. Please put your phones on silent or vibrate. During the program, we'll have a pretty good discussion, and the worst thing to have is to have somebody's Taylor Swift ringtone ring go off in the middle of our program. Well, not Taylor Swift, but. So please make sure it's on silent or vibrate so that the program's not interrupted. The restrooms, the men's restrooms here to the left, the women's restrooms in the old hall to the right. And our safety exits are here. Fire exit is here. And the men's exit is to the left, and the women's exit, if needed, God forbid, is to the right out towards the front of the building. Without further ado, I would like to introduce, for opening remarks, the President of the Board of Directors of Idara Jafriya, Brother Sayyid Mohsin Hussain.
Thank you, Adam. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sayyid Khaim Hussain, also known as Mohsin. I'm the President of Idara Jafriya. On behalf of Idara Jafriya, I would like to welcome the distinguished guests from the various government agencies in list of order, which are to my left and right. Are Mr. Arif Akbari, Deputy Policy Director for First Lady of United States. He works for the White House. Mr. Samir Hussain, Director of Community Engagement, Department of Homeland Security. Mr. Farooq Bitha, Director of Department of Defense, Office of Small Business Programs. Ms. Nadia Hassan, Commissioner, State of Maryland, Office of Commission on Middle Eastern Affairs. Welcome to Idara Jafriya, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me immense pleasure to host and introduce you all to this beautiful community. I would like to take this opportunity to give a brief background of how Idara Jafriya came into existence and how it has grown over the years into a strong Shia community that is making difference not only within its boundaries but also reaching out to the community outside. Idara Jafriya was first established in the year 1981 when a group of Shia immigrant families came together and formed the organization. It took about 12 years to procure land and to construct the building which you're seeing today. Idara Jafriya is run on democratic principles that is based on the constitution written by the founding fathers of the institution. Free and fair elections are held every year, and the members of Jafriya community elect board of directors and trustees to run this administration. This institution holds programs all year round for the Shia community, runs Sunday school with over 350 students, and holds outreach programs such as interfaith, food drive, coat drive, working with homeless shelters, and the like. Generally, these programs are held to commemorate the birth and death anniversaries of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his infallible family. To hold these programs, Idara Jafriya is highly dependent on qualified scholars of Jafriya faith that mostly reside in countries like Pakistan, India, and some in Europe. Over the years, we have faced numerous challenges in getting a quality speaker to address the main programs that are held in the religious months of Muharram, Safar, and Ramadan. We therefore would like to use this platform to appraise the government agencies that Idara Jafriya is a transparent organization focused on providing the teachings of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, with the sole purpose to develop the community spiritually and to emphasize on becoming a responsible citizen. On this note, I would like to thank you all and hand it over to Brother Adil to continue with the remaining programs. Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mohsin Bhai. Clap, right? We clap. We're going to clap today. Yeah, we'll keep it on the clap platform, right? All right. It's kind of confusing, so I'm glad you clapped. All right, so we're going to move on to the program again. I wanted to thank everybody taking time out on a busy Saturday, especially our panel here today. Can't thank you enough. Inshallah, it'll be, like I said, a springboard for further communication. Moving forward with the program, I want you to introduce Brother Rahat Hussain for some opening remarks. As you well know, he's an active member of our community, and he's the executive director of the Shia Muslim Foundation. Brother Rahat Hussain.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. May 2021, a Shia masjid was vandalized in Long Island. October 2021, an Iranian-born research scientist says that she was run out of her job at the University of Alabama because of her ethnicity. September 2022, a swastika is painted on the doors of several Iranian Americans based in San Francisco. March 2022, members of ISIS planned violent attacks against Chicago area masjids. Their attempts are thwarted by the FBI. May 2022, a Shia caretaker at a Florida masjid is violently murdered. April 2022, 3 Indian men are attacked. They are not Muslim. Their attackers yell, "Get out of here and go back to Iran." August 2022, 3 Shia Muslims are killed in Albuquerque, New Mexico because they are Shia. 1 more person is killed because the attacker thought he was Shia. These last 18 months have shown us that there is an issue of great anti-Shiism and violence against people perceived to be Shia Muslims. At the same time, in the same last 18 months, over 100 Muslims have been appointed to federal office, to political appointments. Many of them are Shia. Some of them are here today. We are living in a time where we face great danger and we face great opportunity. And I believe that we have been put here, our generation has been put here to prepare us for these times because we are ready to take on this challenge, to take advantage of the great opportunity, to take the steps to protect our community, and to realize that we as a community, not just those here at Idara today, not just those in Maryland, but all of us across the country are prepared to take on these challenges and take advantage of the opportunities available to us today. The speakers here today will be talking about some of these issues. They'll be talking about threats to the Shia community. They'll be talking about opportunities for our community. They'll be talking about opportunities for the Muslim community in general and how Muslims are uniquely suited in this time to benefit most from government services and also to act as leaders in joining high-level roles in the government and propelling our community to the future. Not only for the benefit of our own Muslim communities, our own Shia community, but for the benefit of this entire country. So today I'd like for each of you to pay special attention to each of our speakers. We're going to have an exciting discussion with each of them, and they'll all be discussing government and their experience from different perspectives. But for all of us, I think it'll be an exciting opportunity to see, number one, our community is much further than we had thought them to be. Traditionally in our minds we think, is there anyone I can talk to in the government to help me? Is there anyone who even understands our issue? But that was the way of thinking from 20 or 30 years ago. Now, we have many people from our community who are not only there from our community, but we have others who are allies to our community who want to do everything that they can to support all Americans, regardless of our religion. So we're in a situation now that we have great improvement, we have great advantages, but the time now is for us to learn about them, to increase our understanding, and to develop ourselves. So we have a great lineup of speakers today. We'll be starting off the program with Mr. Arif Akbari, who's a member of the Idara Jaffa community, which many of you may not be aware of. He's been attending here for several years. He works at the White House as the Deputy Director of Policy for the First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden, and he has done immense work for our community and for the White House. He's a shining gem for our community as an example, and I would ask you to welcome him with a loud round of applause.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So I thought I would probably start off, well, by thanking everyone for being here today and taking time out of your weekend, and the people who have organized this. I apologize that it came together very last minute, but as things with the government are slow moving, as you know. But I thought it would probably make sense a little bit to maybe speak a little bit about my background. So when I started off in college, I was at the University of Illinois Chicago, not interested in politics, not interested in government. I was pretty cynical at the time, being like, oh, United States government isn't necessarily for us, there's no one like us in government positions and that kind of stuff. So I got a dual degree. My first degree is in economics, my second degree is in psychology with a minor in bio. And I was pre-med at the time, so complete opposite direction. But I'd always self-selected myself out of things and thought that, hey, maybe like I'm not good enough, or like this is for like other people and that kind of stuff. So what I did was to signal to myself that I'm gonna just go for things that I'm gonna just dream for. I decided to, I applied to be an intern in the Obama administration. And it was a very competitive internship, and just sent in my application and like, okay, whatever. I know this is probably not gonna happen, because again, no one like me. I haven't seen anyone like me in a position like this, so, but I'm just gonna make sure that I'm not self-selecting myself out of these things, and then really trying so we can really push the stuff that we believe in. And then I remember just one day getting an email telling me that, it was like, oh, hey, you weren't selected for the internship. So I was like, oh, okay, cool, it's like, there goes that dream. But then I really thought about it, and I was like, hey, I actually think that I really feel like that this is something that I could really do well in, and I think this is something that I'd really be able to benefit my community in. So I made dua, and I said that I believe that this is where I think I can make the most effort, or make the most progress, and I think this is right for me. Fatima Zahra, if you believe that this is where I think I should go and you believe the same thing, then just like take me there. So I resubmitted my application, didn't change a thing, didn't even change the date on my application, which in hindsight was kind of dumb. But then I ended up being the first intern to be selected. They asked me to start 2 weeks early, and then right after college ended, then I was on my way to work in the Obama administration. That was my first exposure to politics, was just being in the Obama administration in the fall of 2016 in the Office of Presidential Personnel. And then I was like, oh wow, I can really work in government, this is great. So then, I don't know if you guys heard, but my idea was, hey, I'll work in the Clinton administration that's following, but that didn't necessarily happen. So after 2016, I was like, okay, I know that I have the capability to do this. I know I have the ability to do well in this, but I just didn't really know how to do it. So then there was a little bit of time where I was feeling like lost and I didn't know where to go, but then eventually I like started volunteering, and I was just like, I'm gonna pick up a little bit of experience. And then that little bit of experience led to another thing, and it led to another thing, and it led to another thing. And then eventually it led me to be, I was bottom of the run I was on the research team on the Elizabeth Warren campaign during the primary. And then after that, that led to me being able to become a researcher on the DNC. In the DNC, I learned how to do opposition research, and I was really fighting against the Trump administration, everything that they were doing at the time. And I was tracking cabinet officials and whatnot, really understanding what it means to fight back. And then after that, I was asked to move over to the White House. That's where I started working in the White House communications team as a researcher. And then after working in the White House as a researcher, then I was able to move to my current position, which is Deputy Director of Policy for the First Lady. And my main thing is the most important, the most useless thing we can have is cynicism about our current political system, because that's easy. And the idea of cynicism is sold to us by people who want the status quo to continue. what we want to do is we want to push back against that, and then we need to have our representation, and we need to be at the forefront. And people, there's no conspiracy against us where we feel like we're not being valued, but the issue is that we're not at the table. A lot of us are not at the table. People are willing to listen, but if we're not there, then there's no one to listen to. So I remember I was talking to one of the speechwriters in the First Lady's office. These were like regarding Eid remarks. And then we were just like going back and forth. I was explaining what Eid was, all that kind of stuff. And then I remember one of the speechwriters came up to me and was like, is it cool if I quote from this, like, is it okay if I quote from this book called the Nuju Bolo? And then I was like, what? Do you mean Najul Balaga? And I was like, yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. I'm reliable. But like through that, like just being at the table, being able to just like really being aggressive and like finding these positions, like we're really able to like carve out our niche, and then we're able to like, impact that change that we're like really looking forward to. And I think so it's not about that people don't want to be inclusive and that people are just like fighting against, we're just not at the table. So we need to find a way to get at the table. And the way to get at the table is like develop your networks, talk to people who are already in the positions that you're interested in, and then kind of understand their story and how to get there. And then just being aggressive and understanding that everyone really needs help when you're working specifically within like a White House environment. Everyone is short-staffed. Congress doesn't give us enough money for anything. So when you offer genuinely to lend a helping hand, then people will gladly accept, and then they'll help you in return. And then, but the key to do that is don't do it as like a transaction, because within DC you see that a lot. But it's like if you're genuine and you really care, and then the way to do that and to be aggressive is just like, remember, you have to stay true to what you believe, you have to stay true to your faith, and you have to stay true to your ideals. And then through that, you can use them as a guiding principle and as a through line to get to where you want to go. And then I will also conclude by saying this: one of the most important things for us to do is to be at like the top of our fields, regardless of what field you're in, whether you're in engineering, whether you're in politics or you're in medicine. But when we talk about being Shia, when you talk about serving the Imam doesn't need people who are okay with mediocrity. We need to be the best in our field so then we can have a voice, so then people can come to us and ask our opinions. When people ask us our opinions, then we can influence and create that change. And then that's what we're all trying to do in the end. And then, like, for example, we don't necessarily, there are countries that we don't have the greatest relationships with, but other people don't understand that because they don't understand the different nuances of like different things. So by just being at the table, you can explain different things. Like, for example, talking about like, oh yeah, can we quote from the Najul Balagha? Yeah, you can quote from the Najul Balagha. You can do like all these different things, but what we need to do is we just need to get to the table. And then another thing that's important to remember is that these kinds of positions, they require a significant amount of sacrifice, where you have to sacrifice a lot of your time. Like, I don't have free time working in the administration, working mostly 7 days a week. I had a meeting today regarding like the G7 and all that kind of stuff. But it's like, when you really want to do something, you can do it. And everyone here has the ability to do that within their own capacity. So I think it's just important to continue to fight, continue to have these discussions, and really just like speak to what you're interested in, and really just like continue to go forward from there. Thank you all again for lending me some of your time, and I really appreciate you all being here and listening to me speak. Ramadan and Salawat.
Thank you very much. That's fantastic. I can't complimented enough without seeming too overboard. I will make a quick comment that the panel here is a prime example that a strength in our community comes from the diversity of our career choices. And without going in a lot of details of what that means, this is the strength that we have in our communities. So at a conference one time, Raza Arsalan made a comment that you don't always have to be the same career path. And our strength is defined if we keep our career paths diverse. This is a prime example of a fantastic speech, and we should all be motivated. I think you took my cheat sheet.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this one here. I memorized it, but just make sure that I wasn't speaking about the wrong person. Real quick before I move on to the next speaker, we will not be taking questions from the audience today. We'll have a panel discussion. It'll be guided by myself and Rahat. But if we have time at the end after the program and there's a more intimate conversation that's needed, you can approach the panel. You can start a line and it'll go all the way around to the side, just like we do for food. Anyway, moving on. Our next guest, Mr. Samir Hussain, is the Director of Community Engagement at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Samir Hussain is currently on a detail serving as the Director of Community Engagement in the Office of Partnership and Engagement, or OPE, at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, DHS, which everybody refers to. His home office is the Office for the Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, where he's a Senior Policy Advisor in the Community Engagement section. Samir previously served as a Supervisory Foreign Affairs Officer in the U.S. Department of State's Office of International Religious Freedom. Earlier on, he said he doesn't like being introduced. I know we're splurging on this one. We're good. Prior to that, he was for the Office of International Religious Freedom. He was the unit chief for the Multilateral Affairs and the Human Security and Inclusion teams in 2021. Prior to that, he was a unit chief for the South and Central Asia and Multilateral Affairs teams from 2013 to 2020. In these roles, he led teams of foreign service officers, foreign affairs officers, contractors, and interns to advise the U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom on advancing U.S. foreign policy priorities. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Mr. Samir Hussain.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you, Brother Adil, for reading out my resume. I got very squeamish when you were doing that, but I really appreciate it. Thank you to the community. This is such a beautiful gathering, and I'm very honored to be here with you. I have to start by handing it to Arib. We had just met, but as your older brother, I got to say I'm so proud of you. You can't say it better, in terms of the importance of this work and sort of being a member of the community. My story is going to be very similar. Rahat asked me to share a little bit about my background as well. I'm going to go into the personal background instead of the resume here. But basically, I'm here today to talk about my role as the Director of Community Engagement with the primary focus of keeping communities safe. And I'll tell you a little bit about how I came to this role. I'm a little bit older than Arib here and probably others, and so my story goes back a little bit, but I think everyone in this room is going to be very familiar with this story. I came to this role because of 9/11. I was an undergrad student. I was a junior at the University of Michigan. Like a good Desi child, like probably many on this panel, I was also pre-med. But like the rest of the world in our country, my life changed on 9/11. I literally, on September 12, 2001, I decided that I wanted this to be my life's work. I wanted to have a seat at the policymaking table. And so I just dove right in. I was like, how do I do this? I switched my major to political science. I chose a pre-law path, started interning in government. I started with interning in Capitol Hill here in DC. I interned at the State Department, the U.S. Embassy in Dhaka, Bangladesh. And at that point in time, I think the older generation will know this, I pretty much had a monopoly on anything South Asia or Muslim, because there just wasn't anyone else, right? If I just said where I was from, they would just stick me on the topic. It's like, here, you do it. Which is incredible. I think that's a uniquely American story, that if you're from, if you're Bangladeshi American, you can actually work on U.S. foreign policy towards Bangladesh. And there's few other countries where you can have your background directly apply in those spaces. Fast forward a little bit, I served in all the different capacities that Brother Adil mentioned, but I think what I want to say is, if you look at my resume, it probably looks crystal clear, like, oh, okay, this person did this kind of study, did these experiences, of course, this is what he would be working on. It wasn't the case at all. From September 12, 2001 up until today, I've just been flying by the seat of my pants. It's like none of this was planned. It's, you just kind of think about what's needed in the moment and you just do your best. You make dua and you're like, God help me, I'm really doing this for the community and for everybody, really, to keep everyone safe. And so I do want to credit the community. It's from you all, from my elders, from the community members that I got my real world education. When I first joined government, everyone looked at Islam and Muslims as a monolith, and a bunch of extremists were the self-appointed, spokespersons for our faith, saying what Muslims believe and what they think. And, we knew that wasn't true, but, policymakers didn't necessarily have that insight. And so I was very fortunate. I was able to be in several different roles where I had a chance to say, look, we're not all the same, right? And it was the community members that were saying we come from different backgrounds, we have different beliefs, we have different practices, and we come from all walks of life. People in America, Muslims in America are from, immigrants from different countries, but then you'll meet people who've been here since, their family's been here since before independence. And so I had a chance to share that with policymakers and say, you know what, we're not all the same, but at the same time, we're like everybody else. We have the same concerns, and we also have aspirations and hopes. And so it's because the community kind of sharing that with me, and alhamdulillah, we're very blessed. Like, people right in this DC, Maryland area know about, villages and far off places because they have direct contacts there. And so it's all been very sort of working hand in hand, and me learning from you all, and then me being able to advise policymakers. And so fast forward to today, I kind of talked about my personal self and then talked about the community's role. I think now we're at a point exactly where, others were mentioning, Adil was just most recently, it's like we're in this moment, and Rahat talked about it. Look at this table. Like, this is the first time in history you're going to have something like this. None of us are here because we're Muslim. We're actually here because this is our day job. And actually, I'm going to churches and synagogues giving the same exact talk. And so, first time in history, the people in these fields are actually from the community, right? And so we're public servants. We're here to serve you. But at the same time, you're our elders and our community members, and we're here to learn from you as well. In my current role, I'm responsible for reaching out to community members to hear from you all about your security concerns. I'm going to masjids all over the country, learning about the threats that Rahat had mentioned. That's exactly my field. I'm trying to understand what are your concerns, and then I'm conveying that to policymakers and decision makers and security experts and law enforcement to say, this is what's happening on the ground and this is what the needs are. And so I do want to mention one of my colleagues who couldn't join today. Her name is Assistant Secretary Brenda Abdalal. She sends her salams, and she hopes to be with you in the near future. But she is the Assistant Secretary who reports directly to the Secretary of Homeland Security. And her responsibility, and mine as well, is to go out to communities, specifically faith-based communities is my role, and hear about your security concerns. And what we do with that is it informs DHS policies. It's like, is what we're doing right now working, or is there more that is needed? And so with that, I do want to get into a little bit about what we're offering, right? And so I'll start with one of the incidents that Rahat mentioned, a very unfortunate one, and you all are very familiar with it, was the killings of the 3 Shia men in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And President Biden, very early on, even before we knew exactly what was happening, condemned the violence and said he was very concerned about it, and talked about the efforts underway to find out what was happening. DHS reached out at the local level, and Rahat played a critical role in this, to reach out to the community, understand what their concerns were, and then we worked with the FBI actually to make sure that there was an investigation underway and that we were keeping the community informed of that investigation. And once the suspect was apprehended, we did a national call where we talked about what we knew, when we knew it, and what we did, and what's happening. But then the work continues. We continue through Rahat and direct community members, learn about what your ongoing concerns are. Just because the person was apprehended and is being tried doesn't mean that the threat is gone, or the concerns are gone. People are still very fearful. There's unfortunately incidents in the news every day, and as Rahat mentioned, the last 18 months So we keep that line of communication open. It's a two-way communication. We talk about what we're offering. You tell us what you're concerned about, what your needs are. And then going back a little bit to my State Department background, I covered religious freedom around the world. Even before that, I was in the Department of Defense. And in 2006, there was an attack at the Golden Mosque in Iraq, and I happened to be one of the only Muslims, and people wanted to know the significance of that. And so I kind of got very involved in advising policymakers. Then over the course of time, there were attacks on Hazara Shias in Afghanistan, there were attacks by militant groups in Pakistan, and then just general societal, intolerance everywhere, Middle East and South Asia, Southeast Asia. And so what I learned through all of that is there's really three things the government absolutely must do in incidents like this. One is you must come out and unequivocally condemn it, say this is wrong, this cannot happen. Secondly, you have to hold the perpetrators accountable. If someone is responsible for it, you then have to, there has to be justice. And then third, and this is where I come in, is you have to keep communicating with the affected members of that community, whether it's the direct victims and their families, or just the broader community because of the concerns that they have. And so, just to kind of delve into a little bit about what we are offering, then I would say again 3 things. One is information. We want to make clear what we know about ongoing threats. We know there's, people will talk about domestic violent extremism or white supremacists. We want to make sure whatever DHS is tracking, we're sharing with you all. And then secondly, what are we actually doing about it? And so there's a number of resources that we bring to the table, which is, I'll just mention one of them. DHS has security experts that go out to different places of worship, and they do an assessment to see if, your cameras and your doors and everything is in line with keeping your community safe from everything from fires to, unfortunately, active shooters. So I've been out to masjids with these security experts going through, doing this tour and making sure all of those things are being offered to you as a source of information and best practices. And then lastly, just working together, right? It's not a matter of just me coming here and telling you all this is what you should be doing. It's like also understanding what your recommendations to the government are, and then I take that to my principal, Assistant Secretary Brenda Abdullah, who then goes all the way up to the Secretary of Homeland Security, say, here's what the needs are. So that's kind of the environment which I'm working in that I want to shed a little bit of light on and how my background plays a role in that. And then just what this is all about, what does this mean to you? I would say I'd like for us to continue to have that working relationship collaboratively. Please consider me a resource. I'll leave my business cards here and happy to stick around for a little bit longer to hear from you and answer your questions. And then also, on a broader note of what was mentioned earlier, if you or your kids or your grandkids are interested in public service, please send them our way. But with that, thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much. We'll move on to our next panel member, Mr. Farooq Mitta. Farooq is the Director of the Department of Defense, Office of Small Business Programs. Farooq currently serves in the Biden administration as the Director of the Department of Defense, Office of Small Business Programs. As Director, Mr. Mitta oversees more than $140 billion of annual awards for small business. In addition, he assists the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Secretaries of Military Departments, Undersecretaries of Defense, Directors of Defense Agencies and Major Commands, and including small business planning into the readiness of the department. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Mr. Farooq Mitta.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. It's really great to be here. Really want to thank Idara Jafariya, the Shia Muslim Foundation, and all of you for inviting me, and to all of you for being here and taking time out of your Saturdays to come hear from all of us and to engage with us. I'll talk a little bit about myself and then a little bit about what I do. And I have a similar story to these guys. I started pre-med. Global events happened. And then I decided to go into government politics, and I decided to go into law school back after I did finish my undergrad degree in biology, and I was really close to still pursuing a career in medicine. But then I decided to go to law school, and I started working on political campaigns. I started getting more involved in the political space, I wanted to pursue a career in government just like these guys. And Samir and I are probably close in age, and I remember those times when we wouldn't even have a way to engage with our elected representatives or a president's administration. There was very few people who looked like us in the jobs that we're in now, probably close to zero, actually. And I remember I've done a lot of political work on campaigns, from Obama to Hillary to Biden, and I've seen the maturation of the community to a time when, you know, we were barely able to knock on the door to even get in, had very little access, and weren't really seen as an important constituency, to now where we have the Biden administration, who's created one of the most diverse administrations in American history. And that includes us. Several of us who are Muslim political appointees got this cryptic message a few weeks ago to just meet for a Muslim appointee photo on the steps of the Eisenhower Executive Office building. And we were like, well, what is this about? What's going on? Like, it's happening tomorrow. Like, why are they just giving us 24 hours notice? Well, it turned out that we were taking a picture with the vice president. And when I showed up, and actually I almost didn't show up because I didn't know what it was, but when I showed up, I was glad that I did. And I saw a whole sea of people. And if you go to her Twitter account, you can see this picture posted. It's been circulating around. And that wasn't even everyone. It was literally, you know, maybe 60 or 70% because of people's schedules and whatnot. But I was shocked to see how many Muslims we have in the Biden administration in really, really important jobs. You know, one of the things that I did right before I came into the administration was on the Biden campaign, I was candidate Biden's senior advisor for Muslim engagement. And my role at that time was to make sure that we're doing all the engagement with the Muslim community and including Muslim voices in our discussions, in our policy teams, campaign staff, et cetera, et cetera. That was the most engagement I'd ever seen since the 15 or 20 years I've been involved in the political process. And one point that I'll make is that it wasn't by accident, it was by design. There's a lot of people around the country, some of them who are here, Azmat, Rahat, Habib, who's on the board of Mgage, and others who are working day and night to make all of this happen and to make this community relevant and important in an important constituency. And during the campaign, we were involved in a lot of policy discussions. Some of the things that Samir is doing today are a result of all of the work that you all and others did to engage the campaign at that time and have that campaign commit and make promises and now work to deliver on those promises. And I've seen even the Shia community grow and become more influential. One of the things on the campaign that we asked for at the time was Senate confirmed Muslim Americans. We have not had very many. In this administration, we already have 8, 9, something like that. Many of those are Shia Muslims. We asked for federal judicial appointments. We've never had a Muslim federal judge appointed by any president. We now have 2. So, look, it's not everything, but we're trending in the right direction, and it's a lot of the people here are responsible for helping make that happen. I'll talk a little bit about what I do. A lot of people ask me in communities, well, why is there a small business person at the Department of Defense? What does that mean, and what does that person do? Well, the federal government, the US federal government, is the largest purchaser of goods and services in the world. In the world. In my department alone at DoD, we spend $80 billion a year directly buying goods and services from small companies. And that ranges from food to clothes and textiles to advanced technologies and advanced capabilities that support our troops. And if you take a step back, every federal agency has my job in it. Not all of them are politically appointed, but every agency has a small business office. And small businesses really play, just like they do in our broader economy, they play a really, really important role in supporting the mission of the federal government, regardless of what the agency is. So one of the things that President Biden did when he first took office, was sign several executive orders around advancing racial equity, around strengthening domestic supply chains, around increasing competition in the country. And all of those had a really big small business component to it. And one of the things the president said was, I want to use the purchasing power of the US federal government to create generational wealth in communities of color, in disadvantaged communities. And that's never been done before. We've got really, really important metrics and targets that the White House has given to us to make sure that we're doing, and I'm doing exactly what I'm doing right now, which is how do we go to communities who traditionally have said, we're small business owners, we've got capabilities, we've got technologies, we've got products, and we sell them commercially, but we've never thought about selling them to the government. In fact, the barriers are so high that I don't even think I can sell to the government. Like, what am I supposed to do to sell to the government? So my job in the Department of Defense is to make that easier for you, to give you all the resources to think about doing that, and to really make sure that we're making it easy so we have diverse communities that are participating in federal government contracting. Well, let me ask you a question here. How many people do business with the federal government in this room today? A few. That's great. How about state and local government? A couple. Great. I will tell you that I've been in this space of federal government contracting from the Obama administration until now. I had my own small consulting business before I took this job. And I will tell you that this community is leaving a lot of money on the table by not doing more business with the federal government. And this is a really unique time in the nation's history where you have a leader in Joe Biden who's saying, how do we bring communities like the Muslim community in? How do we provide them the resources they need from the Small Business Administration and from the other agencies to come and we have loan programs, we've got grants. If you look at the Department of Commerce with the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act and other things that have passed through Congress under this administration, there's so many more resources available through incubators, hubs that help companies understand the process and things like that all across the country, that it's made the access much more easier. One of the things that I oversee is a program called the Apex Accelerators, and I oversee 96 centers across the country that we fund along with state and local government to help companies understand how to do business with both the Department of Defense and the federal government and the state and local government as well. There's actually a location in the University of Maryland, College Park, where we have full-time staff who are there to help companies do business with us. So it's really interesting that a lot of people don't know about the fact that this exists and that the fact that there's all these opportunities available for companies to do business with us. I know in the Muslim community, we have some of the most talented people, some of the biggest entrepreneurial spirit that I've seen in almost any other community. We don't do enough of this in terms of doing business with the government. So my job is to help enable that, not just for this community, but for other communities as well. And I just want to reiterate that these types of engagements are really important. I think it's important for us to hear from all of you, and I'll stick around as well afterwards and would love to chat with anybody who wants to chat. But I think it's also important for us from the government to do a couple things. One is to talk about what we do and what all the initiatives and programs are. Who would have known that we had somebody like Arib working for the First Lady, right, who's from this community? That's something that you all should be very proud of. But we have to promote it, too, from our end, so I think that's really important. And then also to talk about the importance of getting this community engaged, especially the Shia Muslim community that's made so many advancements over the last 10 years. I've seen a lot of settings where I would say traditionally we didn't have Shia Muslim voices at the table, but now we've got people from this community, from the Ismaili community and other communities with the broader Ummah. And I think that's really made an important impact on bringing us together as Muslims from different denominations, but also to show our leaders in elected office that it's a diverse community with different views and people from different regions and some different beliefs. So it's been a lot of fun for me to be a part of that over the years as well. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation. And thanks again for being here and for including us to be here as well.
Thank you, Farouk, for wonderful remarks. I think there's a lot of opportunities that Farouk mentioned that I think we can all take advantage of. But I wanted to add a personal anecdote of one of the first times Farouk came to Idara. We had a speaker here, many of you might have heard of him, Sayyid Amar Naqshbandi, and he was leaving through the back entrance because he had to go somewhere privately. And Farouk was waiting there near the Zari. And he said, "Salam, Sayyid Amar, I wanted to meet you." And Sayyid Amar was like, "Oh, yourself." And then Farouk said, "Oh, I'm with the Department of Defense." And then Sayyid Amar turned around and he said, "Really? Come with me." And then they all became friends, and that's how we all got to know each other over the years. So although it was a fantastic experience, and this goes to show you that, you know, it doesn't have to be that you have a meeting in an office and that's the only way you connect. And these are personal connections you can make. You can become friends, you can become, you know, we're all part of the same community, so we can get to know each other just like we would know any other member of the community. You can get to know our panelists, you can get to know other people in the government, and it's really an exciting time that we can just do that so easily. So I encourage you to just talk to our panelists, talk to other government officials, just in the same way you would talk to any other member of the community, and really develop that personal relationship. Our final speaker for today before our panel is Sister Nadia Hassan, who is an accomplished public engagement professional with over 20 years of cross-sector experience in strategic planning, political strategy, and nonprofit leadership. In 2018, she was appointed to the Governor's Office of Community Initiatives by Republican Governor Larry Hogan, and she serves at the pleasure of the governor and is responsible for developing and managing public-private partnerships that drive business, workforce, and community development while promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion for all Marylanders. Please welcome Sister Nadia Hassan.
Assalamu alaikum. Can you all hear me? Okay, alhamdulillah. MashaAllah, it's such a pleasure to be here. When I first arrived at the masjid, there was this big sign out at the front that said, "Please wear face masks." So I went back out to my car, got my face mask. I try to be a law-abiding citizen, so anyway, I'm wearing my face mask. Anyway, mashallah, jazakallah khair. I just want to say thank you to Masjid Idara Jafariya and for the Shia Muslim Foundation for inviting us and bringing us all together. It's such a pleasure to be here with you today, and I'll give just a brief intro about me. I'm a California girl. I'm a daughter of two Lebanese immigrant parents. My father came to the U.S. as a very young boy, and he ended up serving in the U.S. Military as a U.S. Marine before he went back to Lebanon to marry my mother. And at the time when they got married, my father didn't speak a word of Arabic, and my mother didn't speak a word of English. And somehow they managed to have a very happy marriage for their whole life until my father passed away. Allah yarhamu. So for those of you who are not married yet, just food for thought. And I'd also like to thank my co-panelists. Mashallah, I feel like they told my story from 9/11 to 2018, so I'm going to skip all of that and just kind of bring us all to 2018. And it's really great to be back here at Masjid Idara Jafariya. And I remember at the time I was working as a political strategist for candidate David Blair. Many of you may remember at that time he was running for a county executive. And I recall receiving an invitation. There was a flyer that came to my inbox that said, it was headlined, Muslim Candidates Forum, a meet and greet with David Blair and Muslim candidates. And I was like, oh, that's interesting that they included, my candidate David Blair among, the lineup of speakers with Muslim candidates. And if you recall, at that time, we had a lot of Muslims running for office at that time because, thanks to Trump and the chaos he was creating in our country. But I just thought it was so interesting that he would be included among the Muslim lineup of speakers. But really, well, let me just say that my candidate at the time he was a first-time candidate. He had never run before, and he was running against 3 longtime public servants. And the front runner, who was Mark Elridge, who's the current county executive, he had already been in office at the time for 12 years. And what David Blair had that the other candidates didn't have is he had 2 Muslim staffers. It was me and Sarah. I don't know if you guys remember Sarah. But we were both on senior staff with David Blair, and we were leading and advising the outreach team. And so together we were able to work with the community to cultivate momentum and harness the collective impact of the Muslim vote. And even though David Blair lost the election at that time, the impact was about representation. And it was about what we as a community represented and what we were able to accomplish together through our organizing and civic engagement efforts. And so, I truly believe that it was our collective effort that really helped push David Blair to become that front runner, contender, and challenger to Mark Elridge. And we saw that in the polls. We saw the numbers, even in the voter data. And I was working closely also with the Montgomery County Muslim Council, who reported that in that election cycle, there was a 22% increase in voter turnout than the previous election cycle. So it was just so incredible to see what we were able to accomplish. And in the end, the differential, I don't know if anybody remembers what the differential vote was. Blair lost by 77 votes out of 1 million voters. It was phenomenal. I mean, it was really phenomenal. And he ran again in 2022 and lost by 23 votes, even a smaller margin. So, that gives you an idea of how powerful we are, how powerful we can be when we work together. And the 2018 Montgomery County, that election cycle was one of the best organizing efforts I had ever seen from the Muslim community, more than any other local or national level campaign that I had worked on, and that's including the presidential campaign of Hillary Clinton. So kudos to all of you. This message was a part of it. The community was a part of it. It was a really great effort, and I'm really, really proud to be a part of that, so thank you. In that same year, in 2018, I received a political appointment nomination from Republican Governor Larry Hogan, even though I am a registered Democrat and I openly work on Democratic campaigns. So it was very interesting to receive that nomination. A bit confusing because I wasn't sure how it was going to be accepted, and so the work was interesting, but as you know, we now have a new governor in office who's a Democrat. So today I bring you greetings on behalf of Governor Wes Moore, our newly elected governor. And if he was here, he would give you all an emphatic "Assalamu alaikum." He's really good at doing that. But I supported his candidacy after he announced, and I'm really inspired by his leadership and his policy positions, and I think he's done a phenomenal job already in just the first quarter of this year. So I'm really excited to work with this administration. So today I brought with me a Maryland State citation that I'm going to present to Masjid Idara Al-Jafariya, and I'd like to invite the president, Brother Muhsin, to come up and accept the citation. And I will read it, and yeah, please invite whoever you'd like from the community. And so I will read the citation. By the power vested in me by the state of Maryland, on May 13th, 2023, I present Masjid Idara Al-Jafariya with the governor's citation for the dedication to embracing and promoting the ideals of diversity, equity, and inclusion as it relates to Islam, the Shia Muslim community of the Capital Region, providing the steadfast leadership needed to create a positive faith-based environment where none are left behind, as we join to further shape the way to greater insight, fewer divisions, and increased harmony across the state of Maryland. I think someone take a photo. You're welcome. You're welcome. Absolutely. And I look forward to the discussion after this. And I also make myself available, so if anybody wants to talk afterwards, I will stay behind.
So the next part of our program will be a panel discussion with our speakers and the moderators here. And it'll just be a kind of a casual conversation about some of the topics raised by the speakers and some of the issues that are prevalent in our community and on our minds. So I guess my first question is for Farouk. You mentioned the work of the Biden administration with small businesses and getting into different communities. What are the priorities for the Biden administration for diversity and inclusion, and how can the Shia community and the Muslim community in general take advantage of these opportunities and connect with you on a practical level?
Yeah, so So, a couple of things about my office. My office's website is business.defense.gov. A very simple website. If you go to that website, we've really made it a one-stop shop for small businesses who want to do business with the DoD. And from there, you can see my info, connect with me, my staff, and others. One of the things that we saw during the COVID pandemic was that we became really reliant on foreign sources of supply for PPE and other things that we needed to actually get through the pandemic. And that's something that we all kind of felt in our day-to-day lives. But if you look at national defense and other sectors related to national security, or other sectors that support national security, that's still a problem and a risk. So one of the president's top priorities is strengthening our domestic supply chains and making sure that we have capacity and capability in the U.S. to manufacture and produce the things that we need, especially related to national security. One of the things the president did was he put a policy in place, or actually a regulation in place called Buy America, which basically means that a certain percentage of the goods that the U.S. government purchases have to be made in America. And it goes up over the next several years to a different percentage amount. But one really interesting thing about that was when we give waivers to companies to purchase outside of America, we now have to make those waivers public. And we post them on the White House's website. And the reason that's important is because we want companies who are making goods and services or have manufacturing infrastructure here to come to us and say, hey, I actually make that. So next time, don't give the waiver, give me the business. I can make it, and I can make it here domestically in the country, which is better for our security. So that's kind of one example of some things that we're doing. In terms of equity and inclusion, the federal government actually has goals of what percentage of contracts must go to small businesses and businesses from disadvantaged communities. What the president has done is increase those goals. So normally 5% of our contracts would need to go to small disadvantaged businesses. And most of the people here who started a small business would probably fit into that category because of where you're from an ethnic perspective. We now have a much higher goal, and the president has committed to increasing that goal to 15%, so tripling it by 2025. That means that right now, federal government buyers who are not just at DoD but everywhere are on the hook for making sure that we're doing more business with disadvantaged communities, underrepresented communities, communities that are from distressed areas of the country, disabled veteran-owned companies, woman-owned companies. So there's a lot more. If you look at our trends over the last couple of years, we're spending a lot more money from the federal government in those categories because the president has required us to do so. And then there's a whole host of initiatives from the White House, from the National Economic Council, the Domestic Policy Council, the Department of Commerce, the Small Business Administration to support making sure we're putting in the right policies, programs, and practices to do that. So that's one of the really big initiatives from the White House.
I guess I had a question, and I'll open it up to anybody. It's open. We won't just leave it. In the past, Idara Jafriya, I think you mentioned a small history. We're one of the oldest Shia communities in the country, if not the oldest, at least on the East Coast. I'll go that far. And we had a period of time in which where we were looked to for statements as a representative of the Muslim community in this region. I would get calls from news outlets on if an event happened somewhere and they wanted a statement from our community. CNN, MSNBC, Fox, whoever it was. And then we've had a gap of time where we don't have that representation. So how do we, as the Idara Jafriya, the Shia community, and the lead Shia community in this region on the East Coast, I'll go as far East Coast. How do we get invited back to the table? Whether it's representing our communities at an iftar, or an Eid celebration, or if it's just a diversity event, or even it's just a statement for some adverse event that happened. How does Idara Jafriya as an administration get back to the table as being one of, if not the lead organization to represent the Muslims in this region? I'll open it up to everyone. Start here.
Yeah, so I think that's a very good question. I'm not necessarily sure how it works as like an Idara Jafriya administration, but like as a on a personal level, one going to the Eid celebration, going to various like events, that's incredibly important, and then like developing those connections is vital to be able to do that. So just being on the other side of things, how I kind of see it, it's on a lot of these things, because there's so much going on in the world, people are kind of just going by like, who do we know? Who do we know in this situation that we can talk to about this? And it's usually kind of like everyone is just putting out fires. It's one fire after another. So it's like then that's how they kind of go about addressing it. So I think one thing that's really important is, I think something that gets lost is a lot of times for the sake of like the idea of unity and all that kind of stuff, we kind of put aside the things that make us different, the things that make us special. But understanding that things that make us different and make us unique are actually where our power come from, and really embracing those. If we're really able to embrace those in these environments and really make it known that like Muslims are not just Muslims. Muslims include Shias, Muslims include people who don't prescribe to a branch. Muslims include Sunnis and whatnot, and then we do have these like distinct differences, and then it's important to have a wide range of opinions. I think that's incredibly valuable, and just continue to have these like conversations and being more creative with where we're involved in. Just having our Shia community involved in just the Muslim events, in my opinion, doesn't cut it. What we have to do is we have to be involved in other people's events as well. Like if there's something on, for example, anti-Semitism, like that is an important thing that we can be a part of, or it doesn't have to be religious based or whatnot. But just showing that we ally with different groups, then those groups will help us, then we can help them, and then it can be like an entire community effort. So then when something comes up, then someone's gonna be like, oh, who do you know from this community? And that group can like refer to us and be like, oh, we should also get their opinion on it. And then I think that's probably the most important things is like developing those relationships just outside maybe even like just the Muslim networks, and just being really, really creative on how we get involved. And we can't just be involved in just the Muslim things, and we can't just be involved in like, oh, we specifically care about these issues. We have to show people that we care about their issues as well, because then that's going to invite other people to care about our issues. So that's what I would say was probably the most important thing.
I was just going to say that, in order to build the influence that you're talking about, it's important to build trust. To build trust in the community. And I'm sure you've all heard the phrase, all politics is local. And I can't emphasize this enough, because if you want people from outside of the community to come to you and trust you and take you seriously, you really, just like Arib said, you have to build those relationships. And as a community, I know a lot of times it's fun to go and meet with our congressional members and take that photo and all of that stuff, and that's great, but we really need to get involved in local politics and local government. And I recommend that you start by going to your county website, find out what the county executive's strategic priorities are. Find out what resources are available to us on the local level, at the local level. Go out and make sure to attend those county council meetings, the city council meetings. Get to know your mayor. Get to know your city council members. Create those relationships, so not that only you know them, but they know you, and they know you by name. Also create, build the relationships with your state senator, your state delegates. There's a lot happening. You'd be surprised. There's a lot happening on the local level. And a lot of times, when you build those relationships and you create that trust with those representatives, they're going to come to you, especially when something happens, when they know you're Muslim, or if you're of the Shia community or whatever, they're going to come to you and say, hey, this just happened. What do we do? What is, how can we help? How can we support? Ever since I moved, I'm from California, so I moved to the East Coast. I made sure to develop those relationships. For example, I live in the city of Greenbelt. I make sure to check in with my mayor at least once a month. And over time, our relationship has evolved to now where he calls me and he's talking to me about partnering on certain initiatives. And it's not me calling him, but don't be afraid to reach out and send an email and say, hey, let's meet for coffee. Once they know you and they know who you are, you become that trusted constituent in their jurisdiction, and then it's easier for them to trust you, to trust us as a community, and then that's how we can have a voice. And so I would say that literally your center of gravity for power and political influence is going to be what's closest to you, and change happens a lot quicker in your immediate communities than it does on a federal level. So that's what I was saying.
I just want to get back to what you were saying.
You can't overstate the importance of relationships, so I'll hone in on that as well, and I'll just refer to kind of my relationship with Rahat. I've been in government for 16 years of career, and I've been working with Rahat for 10 of those years. And basically the way it works is whenever I have a question, want to reach out to a certain community member, or even when I was at the State Department and learned about something overseas, Rahat was one of the first people I would call. Same way, if he has a question about government, oftentimes he reaches out to me. He mentioned the issue of Shia scholars coming to visit. We have talked about that. That's not my issue at DHS, but I've been talking to State Department and connecting Rahat and other community leaders with the State Department. So that relationship over many years, helps both sides really, because we can keep that line of communication open, and it really is critical. The other point I'd like to make is, as far as having influence and a seat at the table, I think you also have to kind of look at the priorities of the government officials that you're seeking to connect with. It's always online, right? Or any event you go to, they'll talk about the range of issues, and that way you don't have to focus on, as Arib was saying, just on attending the Eid event or Muslim issues. It's going back to what Farouk was saying, the Muslim community is very diverse and entrepreneurial, brings a lot of expertise to the table, and you should be at all of the tables, right? Not just the one that says Muslim on it. And so I think part of it is strategizing, and I recognize the difficulty. Many of you, this is kind of what you're doing in your volunteer time now on a Saturday afternoon. It's not your full-time job, so it does get very difficult. But I would then point back to relationships. You can always lean on some of us to say, give me like the 30-second version of all the things that's happening and where we can plug into. Thank you.
So Nadia and Samira both mentioned that the main thrust of their work is working with different Muslim communities and masjids, organizations, etc. What are some of the best government-related initiatives or projects that you've seen from Muslim communities or masjids, organizations, and how can other communities replicate that?
Yeah, was that okay? So alhamdulillah, it's I've been working across the state of Maryland for the last 5 years since my appointment, and it's been an absolute joy working with the Muslim community, with all the mosques up and down the state. There has been so many initiatives, so many great initiatives, from food drives to coat drives to distribution hygiene kits for women and girls. The Muslim community, I think, did a great job in helping to coordinate the vaccine pop-up clinics during COVID. Health screenings. MCC is not too far from here. They have their own health clinic, and they see not only Muslims, but they see the community. And I also think that the Muslim community of all denominations has done a wonderful job in inviting neighbors and newcomers to the mosque, and interfaith neighbors, and even elected officials, to learn about their policy platforms and their campaigns and that sort of thing. So I think we do a wonderful job in just being a welcoming and inclusive community. And I can honestly say that because I've lived in different parts of the country, and I truly believe that Maryland is one of the more progressive Muslim communities in terms of community outreach, in terms of offering essential services that are needed to Marylanders and that sort of thing. Having said that, I think that there is room for improvement. We can always stand to do better, and I think that we need to continue to harness the power of our collective efforts, kind of like what we did in 2018 during the Montgomery County primary election. And I think it would be good if we organize some sort of, and again, I'm just brainstorming right now, but just organize some sort of meetings where we all come together, we learn from each other, we can share best practices, and also work with the Muslim councils across the state, because they're doing phenomenal work, and oftentimes the mosques may not be aware of what the Muslim councils, even within their own county, of what they're doing. So kind of bringing the community together just so that everyone is informed, and then I think that would make for better distribution of information, as well as making resources more accessible to the broader community.
I think one of the things I was going to mention is very similar was the Muslim community's pandemic response. And when I was at the State Department, I wanted to make sure that policymakers were aware. I was joking about not going to med school, and many of us were pre-med, but fortunately a lot of my brothers and sisters did go to med school. And so I was saying, Muslim communities at the, front and center of this here in America and around the world, and I wanted to make sure people were aware of that. And a number of organizations were connected, with vaccine drive efforts, and a lot of masjids opened their doors. And so I think that was one of the areas where we, as a community, really stood out, and it wasn't something where we were just called on because of a Muslim issue. It was a global humanity issue, and I thought that was one of the examples that really stand out to me. The other thing I would mention, as far as room for improvement, I'll actually turn the spotlight back onto me on this side of the table. At DHS especially, I think there's an issue of trust deficit, and I think this is where, especially law enforcement agencies, they're always looking for ways to have better outreach to communities, right? That's why my position exists. So I think one of the things I want to learn from you all is not only what your concerns are, but what your ideas are, right? So the next thing, that if I come back in a year to point to as a success story, I want it to be something that we work together on, that you had an idea, we worked together on it, and that's where we carved out a way where the community contributed in a way that benefited, everybody, right? So I just want to share that as one of my kind of contributions today. Thank you.
So, I have a potential success story we could share a couple of months when we meet again. So I'll segue this question. We got approved for the security grant that you apply each year for, but we got approved for that almost 20 months ago. And normally they give you 12 months to fill it. So we've gone through several iterations. So there's 2 questions that come in, and hopefully the answer will give us a success story we can build upon. It was through Homeland Security, but managing was HCMA. Is there a way we can help, or they can help us streamline the process? I think they change managers and the requirements change, and then it just seemed, I'm going to pick my words correctly, but is there a process we can help streamline, or we can attend some type of training, or is there something we're missing? Because it seems to be very redundant, where we're sending in the same things and it's coming back later that's not correct. Is there an effort to review that year and audit, or is it just the process? It is what it is.
Thank you. That's a perfect question, because that's something I didn't get into during my remarks. But what you're talking about is Department of Homeland Security, through the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, manages a grant called the Nonprofit Security Grant Program, and that helps facilities like this improve their security. And every year, the administration is asking for more money from Congress for this grant program. Currently, Congress has given FEMA $305 million additionally for this grant. And so congratulations for kind of being able to successfully apply. I think one of the questions people are asking is, how do we make this grant more accessible? And I think what you're talking about is how to make the process more efficient and to streamline it. And I think the way it works is, as you mentioned, the federal government gives the state the money to administer that grant, and then you have to work through state processes. And so what we're trying to do is, at least in my role, hear about your experiences, feed that back up, and see if there's a way to make it, as you said, more streamlined, but also to make sure that when you do have questions, they're getting answered. The complicating factor of the way it's designed is it's a reimbursable grant, so you apply for a grant, but at the same time you've bought a whole new security system, then you have to supply the receipts, and then you get reimbursed much later. You mentioned 20 months. That's generally how it works. You apply for a grant, you get approved maybe almost a year after, and then after that you have to submit the receipts. So that's my understanding, but I think we should talk about your specific question so I can hopefully connect you with the right person.
So I'm not sure when you applied, but I'm not, you're aware that Senator Pinsky is no longer the state senator, so he's transitioned over to the Moore administration. So we had a change in administration. So I don't know if it got caught in the middle of changing administrations, but I could find out and get back with you on that. Yeah.
So as we come to towards the end of the program, I have one question for all the speakers. Actually, it's two-part question. So first, what are some upcoming projects or initiatives that you're excited for the Muslim community, and what in general can the community look forward to? The second part is a more specific question. How can the communities or our community more specifically and directly engage with your office and your work? Some of you have answered that in some ways, but we could all hear it like all at once. I think it would really be helpful. So we'll just go straight down the line.
Sure. One of the things that I'm working on, which isn't necessarily in this area, is those 96 centers that I mentioned that my office oversees that help businesses learn how to how to work with the federal government. I'm actually establishing a center like that in Dearborn, Michigan, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to launch it in the coming 3 to 6 months. So I'm really, really excited about that. As you all know, that's the hotbed of Arab and Muslim concentration in the country, and it's an underserved community. There's a lot of entrepreneurship there, but not a lot of engagement from the federal government on how you can work with us. So I'm really excited about that project. And then again, my office's website is business.defense.gov, and from there you can reach out. You can also go to the Small Business Administration's website. They have kind of the broader programs that they offer, but my office can help with specific opportunities within the DoD to do business.
So we have a new administration at the state level, as you know, and my focus for this coming administration is going to be trying to build closer relationships between the state and the Muslim community, and also trying to garner that, that collective impact that I was talking about, bringing the community together so that we can do more together for a greater community impact. So I welcome any participation or involvement. I will make, I have my cards available. But where I see a huge need, given this administration, because Governor Moore, his platform, his campaign platform that he ran on was an education platform, and he's very progressive in this area. And so where I see there to be a need, especially for our young Muslim youth, is in youth leadership development and youth engagement. And some of you may be aware, I started a nonprofit organization called the Young Leaders Institute back in 2016, which is a nonprofit that empowers young people in leadership skills. I convened a leadership, a team of leadership experts, and we created a curriculum that works on interpersonal skills development, conflict resolution, ethical leadership, and civics education. And alhamdulillah, I've had, since 2016, I think we've had over 2,000 young people come through the program. I've trained over 600 young people in civics literacy, and taken them to the Hill and the state capitals to have those high-level conversations on policy and advocacy issues. And actually, when I was working for Engage, which is the organization that Farouk is a founder of, I was able to bring those young people that I had trained and place them on the campaigns that we were supporting through Engage. So it came in, I was able to leverage my network, so it really came in handy. So, but my project is not new, but now post-pandemic, and now that we have a new administration, I think there is there's definitely an opportunity for us to partner with state and local government because they're going to be rolling out initiatives, and I'm hoping to get greater support from the Muslim community. So again, if anybody's interested in participating, I would welcome your participation and involvement and advice. So thank you.
I think it kind of goes back to, as someone who's speaking in my personal capacity, if you want to be able to engage in the higher level politics, higher levels of government, I mean, first and foremost, everyone has to be voting. It goes back to these politicians, government officials, they do worry about re-election, they worry about the party system, and all that kind of stuff. All that stuff is in there for you. If you're not voting and you're trying to make an impact, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot, to be honest. I think being engaged on the political level is incredibly important. To be able to engage with administration officials, state level officials, community officials, and then going back to what the other panelists have been saying, being involved on the presidential side, and I say this as someone who has been involved in the campaign, the presidential side, while that's what gets the national news, international news, all that kind of stuff, the real stuff is actually done on the local level. And then if you're not, if you want to engage on the higher levels, you have to do the groundwork. once you're able to do work on like the lower levels, then what the higher level of governments do is then they reach out to these communities and issue areas and be like, who do you guys know that we can talk to? And then they will connect them to you. Like if you haven't done that work on the local level, you're not going to be connected on the higher level. So I think the first thing is just like make sure you're involved just in the political system. I may be a little biased, but I don't think we have the luxury of being a smaller community within the Muslim community itself and just in the United States of America. We don't really have that luxury of just sitting out and just like letting things just go by the wayside. So I think if you want to be able to engage on the presidential side of things, if you want to be able to engage with people in Congress and the Senate, then you have to engage with people on like the lower levels of government as well. And I say lower as in just like, you know what I mean. But every level of government is incredibly important, and all of it leads into like the bigger picture. So it's like kind of like you can't talk about calculus if you haven't done algebra yet, right? And so you have to be able to develop that foundation. Once you develop the foundation, you're able to stand on that foundation. But then if you just like go to like top levels and then you think that, hey, if we can get invited to a White House event, then the president's gonna just pick us out of the crowd and be like, you know what, that guy, that person knows. Like, I wanna listen to them. That's not what's gonna happen. And I learned that maybe the hard way as an intern, but you really like figure out it's like when you develop that foundation and then when you have some place to stand up, you can talk on you can speak on a level of and have like a level of authority. Like, this is what we have done before. This is why I know. This is what needs to be done, and this is my advice. And then that's how you get to the table. But I think just being engaged and being engaged on every level. That's how it works.
I agree with everything that's been said. Just a few things to add. As far as upcoming initiatives, in December of last year, the White House announced a new initiative to combat anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and forms of hatred. You're going to see a lot of Muslim community members being tapped for their insights into what they would like to see, and I think it's a unique time when the government is listening at the highest levels and at the local level, and here's an opportunity of everything we've learned over the past decades to really put that to use now in terms of how to really make everybody more safe, right, and to really, really tackle the type of hatred we're seeing today, which is quite alarming. And then as far as staying engaged, I would say, you know all of us now, so get our emails and keep in touch. But I would say that, again, going back to the diversity of the community and the knowledge base, there's so many different ways that you all can plug in. So my role is to really look at all of it. I spoke almost exclusively about security and places of worship, but I'm really there to listen to the community members about everything. The other areas I look at are travel, your experience at the border. I've visited many different airports to better understand what happens when you come from overseas or when you're going to the airport. And then there's other issues of, just DHS in general and its relationship with the Muslim community over the last 20 years and that trust building. So I'm involved in a lot of different areas that I didn't really get into today. But as long as we keep that open line of communication, I think we're going to find that there's a lot of different areas where we kind of need you actually at the table informing us about these issues and a way to just keep abreast of all of the developments and where you can plug in. And it's just keeping in close contact. Thank you.
With that, I think we're going to end the program. I want to thank our panel. Again, thank you very much. Very impressive. Strong foundation for a relationship continue forward. And I wanted to thank Rod for setting this up. And I want to thank myself for being such a great MC. And thanks to the community. Hopefully this will spread. This is another part of our responsibility as a community. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.